panel discussion on vehicle to grid. Perfect. We are recording this panel discussion, so if you are not fine with that, just don't turn on your camera and ask questions only through the Q&A function or in the chat, or leave. That's always an option, obviously. Yeah, so welcome you all to today's discussion on vehicle to grid, a hype, hope, or reality. First of all, I would like all of you to type in very quickly where you're joining in from, so we know where you are and we'll have a rough idea who we're talking to. Just use the chat function in the chat box and type in where you are at the moment. All right. I see Finland, Juha, nice, thank you. Germany, great. Another Germany. London, oh, Anders, you're in London, okay. Rwanda, nice. So Anders, we are on the same time zone then. I mean, in Spain, that's great. Good morning to you then. Okay. Oh, I see. I need to. I was wondering why we didn't get any responses. I needed to enable the chat function for everyone, not only panelists. Great. So now we get another Germany. I see some familiar names also in the attendees list. So, oh yeah, Seattle, nice, UK, great. Australia too. Wow, so I think we have a rather international audience today. That what it looks like to me, at least. Well, thank you all for joining. Good morning to all of you in Europe, and good afternoon to everyone east of us. And yeah, let's hope we have a great discussion today. Before we get started with the discussion, I would like to introduce the Energy Innovation Network very quickly, also known as the EIN. So I will share my screen and give you a quick idea about us and tell you what we are and what we do. So I hope you can see my screen now. If you could just nod for a second, if that's, I see some nodding, great. All right, so yeah, EIN, what are we? We are a platform, or we focus to be a platform to bridge smart minds around the world to advance to a more sustainable future. EIN was founded in 2015 in Silicon Valley, California, and it's a global nonprofit powered by volunteers from US, Asia, Africa, and also Europe. Our volunteers come from numerous backgrounds, mostly in the high-tech and energy industries, but some others as well. We organize event series, conferences, and education programs to bring together over what is now over 5,000 worldwide industry professionals, business leaders in the energy, environment, and transportation sector. And we intend to build a global network to promote energy education and innovation. We also envision collaboration as a way to drive forward to a more sustainable future. This is a map that shows our current EIN global community presence. As you can see, we have a lot of people in the US, obviously, as we were founded there, but we have a growing presence in Asia and Africa and Europe as well. Yeah, our volunteer-based team comes from various backgrounds. Here's just some examples on where we come from. And I would like to take me as an example to show you what diverse backgrounds we all have. So my name's Felix, I'm from Germany, and I joined the EIN's executive team, or the event planning committee, just this year in March. I've been following the EIN activities for a while now. And in my day job, I work at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Frankfurt on sustainability topics and issues in the area of assurance, finance, and corporate social responsibility. I also have some experience working on the topics of sustainable transport and energy in Germany and China as well. So here is a little snapshot of our team. As you can see, it's a very global and diverse team. And again, we come from very different backgrounds, mostly in education and energy industries, but also finance and assurance, like me. Yes. You can always find more information on our members on our website too. And we have an advisory board from academia and policy institutes. You can see them here. They provide us with valuable suggestions on industry and industry insights. Oh yeah, this is our board members as well. Great. What we do, we host distinguished speakers events like the one that we have today every 1 or 2 months. And we have an annual education program designed for professionals and students. We also present the Inspire Summit, an annual conference with a different theme each year for bringing impactful organizations and speakers together on a series of important forward-looking subjects. We also regularly collaborate with different corporations, NGOs, and higher education institutes to expand our network around the world. We had here's a couple of events that we had in the past, just to give you a rough idea on what we do and what we talk about. You can always find the past events on our YouTube channel and re-watch them and learn things that we've talked about in the past. In July, we had an event on the role of financial institutions in the deep decarbonization. We had some very nice and great insights from UK and the US. Before that, we talked about emerging markets of grid interactive efficient buildings. And before that, on innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment opportunities in climate tech. In January, we also talked about battery second life, so the recycling of EV batteries and what we could do with that. If you want to learn more, get in touch, or just be part of our network, you can always try and reach out to us using our email. You can find us on the internet, on our website, or join our Slack channel, where we communicate a little bit more regularly with you. And it's a little bit more direct as well. So yeah, and as I mentioned before, you can also find us on YouTube, where we will upload all the events that we did in the past. All right, now let's get to today's event. Vehicle to grid, hype, hope, or reality. Let's think about the decarbonization of the transport sector for a second. We have to significantly decrease our emissions from transport over the next decade. To do so, we are looking to electrify almost all means of transport that we use in our day-to-day lives. Now, let's picture a world where all cars on the road are electric. For me, that's not very hard to picture because I already know a lot of people that own an electric vehicle, and they use it to go to and from work. They drop their kids off at school and go grocery shopping with it. Still, the car stays still for most of the day. In fact, I read some studies that even go as far as saying cars stand still for 95% of its lifetime. So just think that would be EVs with all its energy storage potential just waiting to be utilized. So until 2035, there is going to be an estimate 65 million EVs or electric vehicles on European streets alone. If we could utilize that energy storage capacity of these EVs and create like a bi-directional flow of energy that charges the vehicle, but can also feed back into the grid, we could make the integration of renewable energies much more efficient and easier. It will also reduce stress on the grid by having that bi-directional flow of energy. So this is just a very short and quick introduction to what vehicle to grid is. And probably some of you have more experience in that, and some of you this may be something completely new. So we have prepared this quick question for you that you can answer. The question would be, for me, vehicle to grid is it a hype? Is it a hope? Is it a reality? Or is it something completely new to you? Please just give us a quick answer so we can see what you think about that. Right. Okay, I think we are getting a lot of answers. Great. So almost 80% of our participants have registered their answer. I will end the poll and share the results now. As you can see, I hope you can see, most of our audience think that vehicle to grid is a hope. For 3 of our audience, it's already a reality, so that's nice. And only 2, it's something completely new. So also nice to hear that something most people have heard of. And for the 2 that are here to learn about it, you're very welcome to ask questions and everything in the Q&A section of it. And I hope after you leave, you will know a little bit more about it. All right, so I'll stop sharing the results. Okay, so now let's get started with the actual panel discussion. Before we start, I would obviously like our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will start with the discussion itself. So I would ask you please to give a very short introduction about yourself, what your background is, and how your work and how your daily lives connect to V2G. So I would like to ask Usama to begin introducing himself.
Okay, thanks for having me in this webinar, and it's a good opportunity for me to express my understanding for V2G and especially learn from others. So my name is Usama, and I did a PhD in power system, and my research area was the optimization of distributed energy resources to support the electrical network. So I did some modeling and developed some algorithms to mitigate the impact of cluster charging of electric vehicles, specifically in shopping center parking lots. And I'm authored and co-authored of 18 scientific publications, generally in the area of smart grid incorporating electric vehicles. And currently I am working with Evernergy as a senior zero emission transport engineer. Evernergy is a software as a service company, and its head office is in Australia. And it is with a mission to accelerate the net zero transport future, specifically in Australia and in the world as well. So we have a presence in Australia, UK, North America, India, and Asia Pacific. So basically, Evernergy is providing a sustainable solution for the zero emission transport, specifically EVs, batteries, and charging infrastructure. And we also have an in-house capability of doing a project like energy markets, transport planning, and policy analysis or financial assessment of zero emission transport solutions. So, and Evernergy is also a strategic consultant for many federal and state government organizations as well. So that's a brief intro about me and the company.
Thank you very much. Nice to have you on the panel. Amit, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Felix. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time zone you're in. My name is Amit Agrawal. I work at the BMW Group, based out of Munich, Germany, and I work in the corporate strategy function. My current field of focus is circular economy and electric vehicles. So I work a lot on batteries and how to achieve circularity, and lay down the strategy for BMW Group from a global perspective across the brands of Mini, Rolls-Royce, and BMW. I think just a few maybe opening remarks based on what Felix mentioned, that all of us in the automotive industry are working towards decarbonization of transport, and of course one of the natural answers to that problem is electric vehicles. when we look at electric vehicles and decarbonization at BMW, we just not only consider the tailpipe emissions or the absence of tailpipe emissions and just clean energy during the use phase. We also look at the whole life cycle, which includes, in a classical sense, scope 1, 2, 3, upstream, downstream, all put together. And to that end, when we look at the transformation to electric vehicles, we find that it's important to have green and clean energy, not only in the usage phase when you charge the vehicle, but also in the production phase of the vehicle, which also includes production of batteries and so on. So the emissions from EVs, while they come down significantly and on the use phase, they also go up slightly in the production phase. And to that end, it is for us of paramount strategic interest to support a clean and green grid. And if that clean and green grid is going to be achieved via renewables, which kind of naturally require a storage or a smart demand management to be effectively the prime supplier of energy of the future. And we hold the other part of the puzzle, which is a lot of batteries floating or moving around in the cars that we manufacture. It definitely sparks our interest in to look at V2G as an area of active interest. So by 2030, we plan to have about 10 million battery electric vehicles delivered to customers. We are a small manufacturer, about 2.5 million vehicles per year in an industry size of about 80 million odd. So we're doing our bit, but we're very keen to learn and exchange on how V2G can play a role, not just to clean the grid, but also as a customer benefit and to make it viable for customers to use the vehicles in more forms than just mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to have you. We'll bring some great insights from BMW. Great, thanks. Now I would like Anders, could you please go ahead?
My name is Anders Hovey, and I'm the project director for the Sino-German Energy Transition Project. Normally, I am based in Beijing, China, and have been living in China for 12 years, but I'm recently relocating to Europe. I have been studying energy and energy issues for about 25 years, including in the private sector, on the investment side, as well as on the policy side. And in the recent years, really have focused a lot more on the topic of integrating EV charging with renewable energy, especially in China, but also in Germany and other markets. And our analysis is very much a modeling analysis that looks at how power sector will work in the future with high proportion of renewables in China and Europe, and looking at how EV charging from renewables or even V2G, if that's a hope that we all have now, I gather, how that could work for both small communities such as rural areas, where we just completed a study looking at rural areas of China and Germany, as well as large cities. How could V2G or just smart charging contribute to stabilizing the grid, integrating more renewables, reducing regular emissions of pollutants in cities and urban areas, as well as lowering the life cycle cost, as Amit already mentioned. And I have a number of studies in this area, but I'll throw the links out if they happen to come up in the discussion. I also have had a number of road trips that I took to compare the charging infrastructure in China, in Europe, in Ireland just last week, and also in the United States, and have a lot of experience actually experimenting with the charging experience and how that integrates or does not integrate with the electric power supply. So yeah, look forward to the discussion, and thanks for having me.
Great, thank you very much. That's going to be very interesting to hear, especially your experience with trying out these different vehicles around the world. Great. Juha, can you please introduce yourself next?
Thank you, Felix. And good morning, everybody. My name is Juha Karppinen, and I've been working for Virta as the Director of Energy Services for the past 4 years. Firstly, a bit about Virta, as you may not be fully familiar with our company. We are a global end-to-end EV charging network supplier. This means that we provide basically everything that is needed to start and run a charging network. The heart of our services is the cloud software platform that has the charging point operator, CPO if you will, e-mobility service provider, EMSP, and energy management, EMS tools, all kind of rolled up together into one integrated cloud-based solution. And in addition to our cloud solution, we also retail the compatible charging hardware, charging stations. This includes normal AC, smart charging, DC, fast charging, and also V2G chargers and other installation services. So far, since this is the V2G webinar, we have installed and commissioned about 150 V2G chargers, and they are running even today. And today, the kind of in a broader sense, our services are deployed around in 30 countries, mostly in Europe, but also Southeast Asia and South America. And we are serving every day over 500,000 EV drivers in over 800 distinct charging networks running our tools. And as for my own background, prior to starting at Virta, I worked in new business development of the second largest utility in Finland, Helen. There we actually spearheaded the first V2G charger in Finland, and it was also the first public V2G charging point in the Nordics. That was in 2017. And also we had the first large grid-connected battery system, the Suvilahti sähkövarasto, called in Finnish, and that was commissioned in 2016. And before Helen, I worked for EV battery pack product development at Valmet Automotive. That's a contract automotive manufacturer here in Finland. And also was studying the battery pack technologies back then as a doctoral researcher in Aalto University. That's briefly about Virta and myself, and I'm looking very much forward to our discussion today.
Nice, thank you very much. Wow, great to have you on the panel too. Last but not least, Akash, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. I'm Akash, Solution Manager at GridX. Personally, I am an e-mobility enthusiast, and I've right from the start of my career, I've been working especially focusing on EV charging and everything related to the EV. So not focusing or maybe focusing only around the business models of EV and EV charging. And I've previously worked with BMW and Volkswagen and also with Mini on topics related to EV charging and trying to explore business models and also the technology around it, together with these leading companies from the automotive sector. And my focus is more towards the EV charging and also trying to offer or trying to understand and research about the efficient integration of electric vehicles into the energy system. And currently I'm working as a solution manager at GridX, the company which is trying to create a platform that is basically trying to integrate all of these different DERs, distributed energy resources like PVs, batteries, heat pumps, electric vehicles, EV chargers, and so on, into one energy platform that can monitor, control, and connect, monitor, and control all of these devices in one place. So Xenon is the platform that we are creating and where we kind of support a lot of different use cases, starting from e-mobility charging site operators to VPPs to energy communities and so on, and also home energy management systems and so on. So these are the different kinds of use cases, and we also kind of support a lot of different use cases together with a lot of different partners that come from various different industries like automotive, OEMs to energy companies like the grid operators and network operators, and also real estate, for example, and so on. So yeah, the role that we do is quite diverse, and the kind of applications that we support is quite diverse as well. So that's a brief background about me and my company. Looking forward to some really interesting conversations today.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Very interesting also to have you on the panel. I like that you are like in between all things. I like the platform that's located in between all of the different stakeholders that are going into that whole thing. So great to have you on the panel. So I would now just go ahead and start with a panel discussion. We will do that for roughly an hour and maybe a little bit less, and then have also give the time for the audience to have like a quick Q&A. If you have questions, just FYI, you can use the Q&A function. You can type in your question there and can also vote on the question. So if you see a question that you would really like to be answered, in the end, you can give it a thumbs up, and the more thumbs ups it gets, the higher it goes up on the list, and yeah, the more likely it'll be to be answered. Also, I think you can answer questions by writing in the Q&A function as panelists. So if you find a question that you just can answer very quickly by just writing a comment, you can also do so if you would like to. So let's get started. So the first thing that I would like to talk about, and it's also, I think, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about vehicle to grid, is the whole infrastructure side of things. So if I use and have an electric vehicle and I drive around, I think of the charging stations that are located everywhere. The question would be, is a lack of charging standards maybe, or the interoperability between different EVs going to be a kind of problem that's going to be in the way of V2G becoming a mainstream thing? Maybe Anders, you have some big experience internationally trying this. Could you answer this question for us?
Yes, I think it's a really good question. I do perceive in my own experiences that there are extreme interoperability problems among charging networks, which effectively prevents users from having a uniform and reliable experience, both not just the equipment interoperability with the vehicle, but also the payment systems, and whether the users feel that they can reliably get a charge when they are on the road. Of course, I think many of us believe that V2G would be most applicable for only a small subset of consumers. For example, maybe at the beginning, V2G would be only applicable for users at home, or perhaps for fleet vehicles that are reliably charging just at their home base. Perhaps we could imagine a school bus at a school parking lot, or also already mentioned was the shopping malls. Perhaps we would imagine delivery fleets or taxis that are charging at their depot charging. So I think that for those, there would be fewer interoperability problems, but I think as well there you would want to have a good experience, and that probably requires very low cost charging network, not extra costs for doing V2G through your fleet or through your home charger. I note the news recently from California, where the legislature and the utilities are coming together and encouraging the vehicles to be charged and the users to be charged for the payment through their home energy charger, and as opposed to through an extra meter. So that's an important step. I think that we need to have that in a variety of applications, and I think that that's also a barrier across Europe and in China as well to having V2G for home or fleet vehicles.
I see. Thanks for that answer. So you said so the charging infrastructure, would there need, you said it's going to be a low cost upgrade of the charging infrastructure. Did I understand that correctly?
No, I think that for V2G to work, it has to be something that can be implemented across a variety of platforms at low cost. I would definitely believe that in the future, even highway charging would have to have some sort of smart charging capability. And I think that right now it's being done on a very ad hoc basis, where each charging network is pursuing its own policies or offering its own situations. And I think that there are aggregator companies that are working on either smart charging of vehicles or V2G for vehicles, but that is being done on a very small scale and on just one type of network or one type of charging equipment, as opposed to being deployed across different types of networks and different types of payment platforms. And I would note that this has already seen a lot of advance. So just a few years ago, I heard from Siemens, not to call anybody out, but their expectation, let's say 5 years ago, was that when we were charging our EVs on the road, we would always be paying through our home electric utility bill. So already we see a lot more interoperability in different payment models than what people envisioned just a few years ago. But I think that this has to be much more widespread, that essentially smart charging and payment for charging or payment for injecting power into the grid has to be somehow more uniform. And this probably does require either some sort of standard or some sort of interoperability requirement from those policymakers that are supporting the build out of charging infrastructure.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thank you. Okay, just to encourage everyone on the panel, if you want to give your perspective or viewpoint on any question that I ask, but not directly directed you can always just indicate to me in some way that you want to answer this question on your behalf, or just unmute yourself and give your point of view. So is there anyone on the panel that would like to give their perspective on this as well? Okay, I don't see anyone. So what I would think now is, well, the charging infrastructure has been developed quite fast, I think, around the world. But is the charging infrastructure that we have now, is it possible to use that or utilize that for V2G as well, or would we need some form of upgrade? And if so, what investments are we looking at here? Is this going to be a major investment size or just a small one? Anders, do you have any idea about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an equipment provider, so my perspective is definitely one of more the user or policy on the policy side. So I don't have a strong view of the investment costs. Of course, for rapid charging, the costs are much higher, so it's important to get it right at the outset.
So, Juha, do you have any ideas on this? You work with, you provide infrastructure to charge with. Do you have anything you want to say to that?
Yes, so thank you, Felix, for the opportunity. So definitely it requires an upgrade. So there are two ways to provide a vehicle to grid charging. One is the DC coupled way, in which all the power electronics are housed inside the charging units, and the other one is the AC coupled way, in which the charger bidirectionality is handled inside the vehicle. Actually, I think the promise was that AC V2G, when it would come, would kind of make the infrastructure cheap, and the costs of the extra hardware will be absorbed by the automotive manufacturer. But as it stands out, due to the grid codes on a global scale, you actually also need to certify the charger regardless of whether the power electronics are in the car or at the charging station. So regardless, are you using DC coupled or AC coupled V2G chargers, the current infrastructure, meaning the charging devices themselves, cannot be effectively retrofitted for V2G.
Okay, I see. Thanks. Okay, great. Thanks. I think I have a rough idea now on the infrastructure side of things. And one thing that comes to my mind is the EV battery swapping. That's something that's being explored around the world, I think, and it's been a little bit more prominent in China. And as you already unmuted yourself, perfect. Would those batteries with varying usability throughout the day present a special case for V2G? And is there currently any interest in that application?
Yes, I think that NIO, as well as several other Chinese manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers, and swapping station operators are experimenting with this idea. I believe that right now NIO is still at the phase of using its battery swapping stations only for smart charging as opposed to battery to G, let's say. But I believe that in the future they would be capable of also injecting power into the grid. I think that China is a very interesting case because they have, of course, millions more electric vehicles on the roads, and then also thousands and thousands now of battery swapping stations, which have an inventory of batteries that could be either smart charged or used in a vehicle to grid or battery to grid function. However, China is also a special case in that there are strong restrictions in using, let's say, customer-sited energy storage to inject power into the grid, relatively more restrictions in this area than in other countries. So although that vehicle swapping stations could be a good option for, let's say, let's call it V2G, then I still would perceive that this would be more likely to take place outside of China for the time being because of the safety considerations and the restrictions on grid access that exist in China.
Nice, thank you. Very, very interesting. I saw Amit, you were nodding at some things that Anders said. Would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. Thanks, Felix, and thanks, Kevin, for your comments. I think the issue here is what direction do OEMs take in terms of integration of the battery with the vehicle, right? And as we just mentioned, the Chinese have a special case of their own and a different direction. If I look at the rest of the automotive industry, the significant thrust remains on increasing integration of battery with the vehicle. So if you look at 2 or 3 generations back, we always had this cell module pack kind of architecture. Now everybody's moving to cell to pack architecture. In the future, it will get more and more deeply integrated. I think if you look at the core ideas of battery swapping from a very top-down perspective, it was to provide customers a very quick turnaround on charging. Right? That okay, you take you drive in your EV, you take maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes to just swap out the battery, comparable to a gas filling station, and then you're out. But if you look at the developments in the battery technology in terms of range, and if you look at the developments in terms of charging, fast charging specifically, there's also a race to provide maybe a comparable experience or I would say a tolerable experience in some terms of charging time through fast charging in public infrastructure. So we don't know which race would win and which regions would adopt what, but right now it seems China is just the only one following the battery swapping model at any significant pilot scale, if you will.
Could I jump back in again and just say I totally agree with that, and I think that it is probably going to remain a small use case for maybe only certain types of passenger vehicles. I perceive that battery swap could be more effective for the trucks as well as buses, fleet vehicles. This is where battery swap might be more important in the future, especially for those really large battery packs. And there again, if you're talking about really large battery packs for very large vehicles that are swapping at depots for fleets, that would be another logical player in this V2G space where they could be working together with an integrator to make use of those batteries that are either not charging currently or could be smart charged or using a V2G function.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks. Very interesting. All right. Yeah, I think that's also kind of what I hear from battery swapping. I've never really seen any use case outside of China, but it's still interesting. But also comparing it to quick and fast charging, I think, yeah, it's very interesting to see that. Yeah. All right, let's continue and go to a little bit more to the power side and grid side of things. I would be very interested in talking about the viewpoint of that, and maybe Usama, you can give us a little bit of an idea how ready and needy the Australian grid is for V2G implementation.
Yeah, okay. First, I will add some point on the battery swapping side of it, like from the power system perspective, like what we can see there from the area where we actually need the battery support in the area, so we can do some optimal placement of those battery swapping stations there. That might be helpful to support the grid in those areas, because currently we're having the issues with the decentralized like electric vehicles, because they are moving around. So we don't know where they will be at and in what location and what capacity. So that battery swapping station can help us to reduce the impact for like voltage rise or frequency, but we just need to do some optimal placement on that. So that is still on trial, but that will also help in the power system perspective. So coming back to your question for how ready is the Australian grid, so and what are the operational challenges we have for vehicle to grid specifically. So some event had happened in the past that make energy operator to consider vehicle to grid as one of the resource to stabilize the Australian grid in the future. For example, a blackout happened in South Australia in 2016. And just recently we had an energy crisis where like the oil prices are getting high due to Ukraine war. So the generating companies are not bidding into the market. So Australian Energy Network market operator raised the lack of reserve notification for that. So as per the Australian grid, we are still in the transitioning phase. Like as part of our energy transition, the system planner are looking for technologies such as vehicle to grid. And in their latest report, they predicted that in 2050, we will have around 28% vehicle to X, combining of vehicle to G or vehicle to house. But just coming back now, the current Australian national grid can support up to like 5 to 10% EV penetration with uncontrolled charging and around 60% with controlled charging. So as per the grid, the first challenge we have is the increase in EV, and to facilitate the growth of EVs, we are integrating renewables into the system. So that will bring us a second challenge. By adding renewables, we are increasing the intermittency in the generation side as well. And the third important challenge that for Australian grids is currently have that we don't have any set framework for vehicle to grid, especially in the Australian market. For example, like how we can standardize the fair market for electric vehicles or aggregator to bid in, or how we can set the contractual agreement between the aggregators or the EV owners. And most importantly, that how we can incentivize EV owners so they can also make money while participating in the energy market in the future. So that kind of a framework we need to understand, or we need to get it mature. But if we just put aside vehicle to grid for a moment and just step back and see how urgent it is for the Australian network to regulate all these vehicle to grid services. So currently less than 1% of electric vehicles in Australia, 1% of vehicles in Australia are electric, and without a bulk of electric vehicles, we cannot do vehicle to grid. So currently our first problem is to accelerate the EV uptake by installing more charging infrastructures, and like the efforts are being made to decarbonize this transportation sector or to increase the power sector as well. So the last year, the New South Wales government announced like more than $500 million in EV programs, which include the tariff or tax exemptions plus co-investment in installing the bidirectional charging infrastructure across Australia. And the goal here for now is to create an environment for at least 1.5 million EVs on the road by 2030. So we will, which will help us to catch up with the rest of the world. So then if we have more EVs, so we can facilitate a vehicle to grid with our grid.
Okay, that's very interesting. Also, thanks for your quick insight into the battery swapping side of things and how that would work in Australia. I think that's very interesting too. And everything else you said afterwards also kind of answered already my next question that I would have, because my next question would have been like, how would the storage system, like you have a lot of storage systems, energy storage systems in Australia. I've read about that to stabilize the grid, right? And well, V2G could have or could be a significant have significant impact on also providing some stabilizing opportunities and capacities for electricity. But I think you touched upon this quite well, that so V2G is really given a significant consideration in the future for stabilizing the grid. However, you still need more electric vehicles. Did I understand that correctly? Right?
Yeah. Currently, we have to accelerate the EVs because we have less than 1% vehicles in Australia are electric.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, maybe you can talk a little bit to Amit and see if he can provide you with some BMWs for Australia.
Sure. So, I think maybe if I just step in there and
Sure.
Put the electric mobility transition into perspective. So if you look at the total number of cars in the world today, the four-wheel light-duty vehicles running on the street, the count varies between 1.2 to 1.4 billion. So that's the worldwide fleet count that's legally running on the roads today. And if you look at the number of EVs that are on the road today, it would be in the range of 20-25 million. So it's the global average is about 2%, 2.5% in terms of fleet. In terms of sales, of course, higher, because it takes a long time to build up the fleet penetration, right? And I think you mentioned those numbers for Europe, about 68 million EVs expected by 2030, and the global count keeps changing. Some people say 200, some people say 300 million by 2030. But the clear direction, even from the regulators, if you look at the advanced clean car regulations or being released in California recently, or the European Fit for 55, the direction from the regulatory bodies is to go for zero tailpipe emission cars as quickly as possible. 2035 as the potential deadline. So that's when you will see a significant penetration. And it's not a question of if, it's more a question of when, in terms of realizing significant number of EV car parks.
Okay. Juha.
A question to Usama, actually, that since you are having incentives in Australia to change to electric vehicles, I mean, having the subsidies and grants from the government, are those somehow directed that they would steer towards vehicles with smart charging and perhaps V2G capabilities? I mean, you can choose between vehicles that are less capable in being a support to the grid and those that are more capable to be support to the grid.
So currently in Australia, there are like 3 models currently available that can do vehicle to grid. One is Nissan and 2 of the model in Mitsubishi as well. And for your question regarding the grants, so for the government, they are particularly interested in co-investing in the charging infrastructure, because it is some of a chicken and egg thing, where they need the charger first to get the electric vehicle, and we need the electric vehicle to get the charger. So basically, we are the government or the state and the federal government are more interested in installing the charging infrastructure across Australia that has the capability to do vehicle to grid as well.
Very good. I mean, looking back into the Nordics, where I have most experience, that in the early days when we had this infrastructure grants and supports in Finland and Nordic countries, we pushed that one of the requirements that you would get this grant would be that the charging network had to be grid connected, enabled, and able to do smart charging.
Okay, it's good. It is good to hear that. Like currently, like in New South Wales government, as per my understanding or my knowledge, we have for a particular grant, the future fuel grant, they have some different rounds, and one round is like already completed for the charges, and they're moving to the second round and third to accelerate that.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. Yeah, also, I think there was one question I was going to ask Juha, if you could give your perspective from the Nordics, but I think that's very interesting how they compare as well. One thing that I would like to talk a little bit more about is like the difference, and I think Usama, you just talked about this a little bit, how decentralized batteries, like the ones in an EV, compare to the central energy storage systems. So grid scale batteries, for example, and that from a grid management, reliability, and financial point of view, do you have anything that you can share with us here?
Yeah, and like if you just go back to the fundamentals for the centralized like energy storage system and for the decentralized one like the EV battery, the primary purpose for the centralized EV energy storage system is to support the grid, whereas for EVs, the main purpose is commuting. So in terms of reliability point of view, the central energy storage system is more reliable than EV battery, because the EVs have some uncertainty factors in there. But at this stage, but as we have a bulk of EVs in the future, that reliability factor may change or more inclined towards EVs. So secondly, in terms of reliability, like the central energy storage system, the system operator has a full control of when to charge or when to discharge and what the state of charge at any given instant of time. But for EVs is that uncertainty factor, that where the EV will connect with the charger and when it will connect with the charger, or if it is connected, either they need the charging or it can provide the charger. So that variability may change the reliability at the moment. But that uncertainty is also in a plus point as well. Like like the EVs are moving around, and like if there is any issues in the system, like a voltage rise issue, so the system operator can get the benefit from the EVs that are close to those areas. So we have a less transmission line losses as well. And apart from that, as I discussed, the battery swapping station. So we can also make some optimization based on where the grid needs support. And that battery swapping station, if it get matured, then we can also install those in those particular like areas to support the grid as well. So these are a bit of comparison between the decentralized or the centralized one.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if Akash could give his perspective, being like in between all of these things on this. Thanks for unmuting yourself.
Yep, I just wanted to add to Usama about what he already mentioned about how the vehicles are being, how EVs are being more reliable. So I think he really summed it up pretty well. But just to add to that, I think, for example, already fleet operators like buses, public buses, or delivery vans, for example, or school buses, vans, and all of these kind of fleet EVs could already be quite reliable, I'd say, because it has a specific route, and it kind of has a specific route that it does every day, and also it has to come back to the same spot. So it's a bit more reliable than other forms of transport, like for example, let's call it a private EV. So there you might have some unreliability because you don't know when you'd be charging or where you'd be going and where you're coming back, how many kilometers you'd be doing, and all of that. But definitely fleet EVs have some kind of reliability, which really helps, I'd say.
And as you raised your hand, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I thought I would just come in here and just mention a little bit about sort of imagining what the power system will look like in 10 to 15 years. And I think that we all understand that there will be a very large amount of energy storage on the system, and also that there will be a very large number of EVs. The International Energy Agency, in a report in 2019 about China, actually pointed out that if we don't use EVs, EV batteries in an energy storage function, in other words, if we don't use V2G for most vehicles, then the energy storage requirements are significantly larger, and the overall investment cost for the grid is significantly larger. Now, that doesn't mean that we will not have centralized energy storage, but I think it does point to the opportunity that we have if we can move faster on V2G to reallocate and basically save money that otherwise has to be invested in the renewable power system. I think also, if we think about the electrification of the economy overall in terms of heating, heat pumps in Europe, of course, very hot topic, as well as PV systems on rooftops, electrification of other aspects of the economy. A lot of those are going to require upgrading our distribution systems. And if we are able to get V2G online in the next few years, that can really help reduce the investment costs in a lot of the downstream regions of the grid, not necessarily on the generation side of the grid. So that's where one of our studies that we looked at these rural villages in Germany and China, where we examined what if a village in 10 years has PV, energy storage, and heat pumps, and air conditioning needs, because climate change, of course, is going to enhance our air conditioning needs quite a bit, even in poorer areas. What about the situation then? We can really use V2G a lot more to help alleviate the cost of integrating these types of electrifications in these rural areas. And I wanted to point out on the 1.5 billion vehicle number, it was actually quite surprising to me that in a lot of the rural areas, electric vehicles are already very widespread for two-wheel and three-wheel vehicles. So we shouldn't just only think about cars and trucks when we think about V2G. I think in the future, there are going to be customers who are able to save significant cost by using vehicles in a V2G capability, even though those vehicles are not the high-end vehicles that are available in, let's say, Europe or America.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for that. I saw I think it was Honda that made like a charging station for batteries for scooters, and you would have like 5 to 6 different battery packs in that charging station, and could also be utilized for making like the street lights shine and everything. So that's a good point, to not only have cars and trucks integrated, but also smaller sized batteries as well. Amit, you have raised your hand. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, just a quick comment on what Anders mentioned. As in, of course, the two-wheeler side is important, and when you look at China, India, Africa, and so on, the two-wheeler, three-wheeler side of equation is also quite interesting. But I wanted to go a bit deeper into the centralized versus decentralized debate, and here bring in the perspective from the battery chemistry, right, and the fitness for use. So if you look at the exponential forecasts, growth forecast for electric mobility, and we say, okay, let's put a model in, let's look at how much batteries do we need. Let us then start looking at how much of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and so on, the raw materials that we need to power those batteries. You start quickly arriving at a conclusion that the mines cannot keep up. It takes 5 to 10 years to develop a proper mine, and they have their own environmental issues and so on. So we have to be very resource efficient when we try to undertake this transformative journey, both on the mobility side and the energy system side. And here there are kind of there's kind of a bit of a dilemma. So on one hand, you could say that, okay, there's already these batteries inside the vehicles, and let's utilize these resources to the best possible utilization. Like you mentioned, 96% of the time the car is just parked, right? So why can't we use V2G there? But so that is an argument in favor of V2G. But then on the other hand, and another argument I can find in favor of centralized systems is they need not be based on automotive grade chemistries. You could also create a centralized system with LFP batteries, for example, as is done in Australia, in Hornsdale. Or you could do so with the upcoming resource scarce technology like sodium ion and so on. So then you don't have that pressure being generated on the mines from a booming electric mobility sector alongside a booming grid sector requiring storage with the same chemistries and then the same materials in demand.
That's a good point. I'd be interested in Akash, on your point of view on this. Could you, because you're like in between all of that, how would that work with your platform that you offer?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, EVs and generally V2G or smart charging, all of this definitely is happening in an environment where it's either charging at a home or in a semi-public sector, so something like a supermarket or somewhere where there's a office building, like office charging and so on. Or it could also be public, where it's fast charging and highway charging and so on. So these are the three main categories where EVs are charging. And in all of these scenarios, we always have a lot of other assets that needs to be considered when we do these do the charging of the EV. So it could be that there's a PV installed, or it could be a battery that is also supporting the local grid, or it could be a building consumption of the office or the building of the supermarket or something like this. So there's like so many different factors that needs to be considered when we are charging an EV. So, and that takes me to the point where we have to somehow ensure that there's an interoperability between all of these different assets that are being part of this environment. So the EV together with the charging stations, batteries, PVs, and the building load of that environment, all of this has to be somehow linked, connected, so that we can holistically manage all of these different assets and optimize the energy within that particular grid. So there's also the network grid operator signals that come saying, okay, you'll have to do or reduce your consumption by X kilowatts because we have we foresee that there's going to be there's going to be high peaks that's coming in the next couple of hours. So things like this. So that's where we come into play, where we try to ensure that the interoperability between all of these assets is highly crucial, and therefore we, with this platform, try to integrate all of these different devices into one place. And then on top of that, with all the optimization engines that we have running on our cloud, we try to optimize as much as possible, considering all of these different factors that we take into account.
Juha, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. Coming a bit back to the decentralized versus centralized debate on the location of the batteries, actually there is a very big value in having the decentralized way. I mean, I would say that the battery in the vehicle will always be more valuable than a stationary one, because you are solving more problems or more challenges with the decentralized way, in a sense that if you have a centralized battery, the best you can do with that is to kind of uphold the power balance of a larger portion of grid, matching generation with the demand of power. But then you cannot really address the transmission bottlenecks of electricity. And I think it's a lot more valuable to solve the problems locally. Then you can also mitigate the grid congestions. And as Akash just said, you can also integrate the local assets. And especially in those rural areas, you can really serve both the local needs as well as the more kind of regional needs of the power system. So definitely it's more valuable to have the batteries scattered around than having bigger facilities at centralized locations. And furthermore, I'd like to debate that, yes, there are more options perhaps for grid scale batteries in terms of chemistries, because you afford the luxury of having it bigger and more heavy than you would want to put in a vehicle. But at the same time, the sheer scale of development, R&D funds and manufacturing is in the favor of the automotive industry. So I would say that it's a bit unlikely that we will get the cost efficiency with different chemistries to the same level as we have with the automotive push today in a short notice.
Yes, thank you. That's a good, it's a very good insight. And I think this is also kind of a very good segue into the next cluster of topics that I would like to talk about, and which is the consumer side of things. So for vehicle to grid to be actually a thing, or vehicle to X, we would need quite a big number of EVs being part of the grid, being plugged in at any time for it actually to be reliable and utilized as an energy storage capacity. And I would like to know, maybe Juha, you can just take this question again. But I would like to hear everyone else's opinion as well. How would the consumer behavior be contributing to the V2G thing? So from your perspective, Virta's experience, what is the consumer's perspective on acceptance of V2G, and especially in consideration with all the anxieties that come already with an EV, with the anxiety of range and battery safety and degradation of batteries over time by usage and so on and so forth. So yeah, how could we improve on that so that the EV owners are actually taking part in V2G?
Yes, so I'm going to broaden a bit subject now briefly to V2X. I mean, V2G, vehicle to grid, can be considered kind of a special case of bidirectional charging. In V2G, you are basically serving the grid and not the local requirements. But let's say if you're talking about V2X, that could be vehicle to home, using it as a home battery, the car, or let's say vehicle to building if you have an office setting. And let's say V2X, vehicle to building, vehicle to home, vehicle to load is generally very accepted and anticipated because it's a directly new value to your vehicle, and the owner of the vehicle is the direct beneficiary of the new service. And you can also yourself, as the owner of the car, you know exactly what you're using it for, and you can regulate how much you want to use your EV into a secondary purpose. Now with vehicle to grid, the main concern comes from the lack of perceived control from the end user. I mean, energy markets are not that obvious to the average EV owner, and therefore it's seen as a bit of an obscure and a bit risky. They don't know what they're engaging in when you engage in the vehicle to grid. You know you're sort of doing something good, but you really don't know what is happening and why. Range anxiety in itself, let's say, if we are talking about, we have in general now we have overcome range anxiety with the new models covering up to 500 kilometers for full charge. It should not be a problem in vehicle to grid either if the charger and the services accompanied with the charger are operated in an intelligent manner. And what we found out when doing the V2G services at Virta is that this means that the user must have the full control to decide when the car must be charged. So you have to give the driver the ability to schedule the departure time. And you must also give the user or the EV driver the possibility to define what is the absolute minimum state of charge the car can be discharged to. This is different from the kind of manufacturer or battery degradation issue. It's more of a peace of mind and comfort for the user that if my plans change, I need to depart earlier, I can be assured that there is this amount of charge in the battery. And also it's good to inform the user that with a forecast of the charging profile. I mean, of course, in the vehicle to grid, you are sort of reacting to the life of the grid, so you cannot give a certain profile, but you can give an indication of what is going to happen in the next coming hours with your vehicle. And finally, there must be also the option to opt out. So in case you now determine that, hey, I have to leave in 1 hour and it's not planned beforehand, I can then interact with the charging session and have a full charge for the remaining time before I have to leave. And with this kind of user engagement that has to be built with some interface, let's say a mobile app like we have done in Virta, or it can be done with in-car controls. With this kind of engagement, you can give the user a peace of mind that they know what is happening and they can be sure that it will not impact their ability to use their vehicle.
Thank you.
Perhaps continuing also that safety itself is not really seen as an issue with V2X. There is the consideration of battery degradation during that is a V2X operation. The way to mitigate this would be that you have to have agreements between the automakers, the charging point manufacturers, and the charging point operators, in a sense that the automaker would extend the battery warranty of the vehicle to include also V2X, as long as there's a mutual agreement between the charging point operator and the charging station manufacturer on how the vehicle charging profiles are adjusted.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'd like to hear all of your perspectives. Maybe Anders, you can go first and tell us what you have in mind.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think that all of those points from Juha are really very important points, and I agree with them. I want to emphasize that from my perspective, for the customer experience, we really have to make sure that the information in the customer interface is really good and valuable. And that's one area where I pointed out earlier my experiences with interoperability. The amount of information that's available to somebody charging at a public charger, or even sometimes at their home energy charging, is really quite poor in many cases. Often you would have to rely on a very specialty app to get anything like a charging curve. And that's kind of the basic information you would need to understand that you're charging speed at a different station. Right now, many stations might even just show you the amps and volts of your charging at that instant. One of the things that I've done in my travels around the world in EVs is try to get public information on the generation sources being used. Of course, some charging networks claim 100% clean energy, but what I like to look at is actually where the electricity is coming from on the grid at that time. This information is publicly available on websites in many areas, such as California, Germany, France, UK, but it is not being given to the users. It's, I guess, considered irrelevant by most charging providers. But you know, we live in a time when people use apps to access all sorts of information about their own batteries as well as their energy consumption. It's surprising that that information doesn't flow to the consumer. And in a V2G situation, we need to know what different options we have, what the prices are, how we could shift our consumption to either a cleaner or a cheaper or both time period. And that interface, I have not seen that anywhere. Maybe I can experience that at a Virta session at some point. I hope so. But I would really like to see a very good interface which is shared across platforms and not restricted to a single vehicle type or a single charging brand.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point, and I would like to hear maybe Akash's side of this later. But I think Usama had his hand raised first, and I think he wanted to point out something to that. But just a quick heads up to Akash that I'll be coming to you next.
Yeah.
Usama, you have
okay.
raised your hand. Yeah.
Okay. So I just like to add something regarding the battery degradation, a point of view in terms of vehicle to grid. Like the major factor for the degradation is how fast we can charge or discharge the battery. So how we can accelerate or what's the driving pattern of that driver. So that mainly affect the battery degradation. But there are some ancillaries like services that cannot affect much of the battery. For example, the FCAS, the frequency control ancillary services, where we just need a fast response for like less than 6 seconds. And we need to hold that power for like a minute or two, and that's it. For that, a minute of two of V2G cannot have much impact on the vehicle to grid. So there is a project currently running on in Canberra where we have a 50 Nissan Leafs and they are providing FCAS to the services. And the frequency may vary due to a certain like event. So maybe happening 1 to 2 a dozen of time in a year. So that FCAS services of using like 2 times a month or like 3 times a month for 2 to 3 minutes will not affect that much of battery degradation. So there are some other factors as well. So because the grid is not more relying on the batteries to support it just for a couple of minutes. So this is what I want to add in terms of battery degradation there. And one more thing, like for in Queensland and in South Australia, we have an excessive solar generation behind the meter. So like when they are dumping power into the grid, so we are having a voltage rise issues. So now the thing is that we have a unit that is important, but at what time we have that like energy unit is more important. So in that regard, the battery also play a very important role in there.
Great, thank you. This also great insights. Akash, could you maybe give your perspective on everything that we just talked about? I would really like to hear what you say.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, talking about customer friendliness and the customer acceptance of V2G, I definitely see these 3 points that are really important for the acceptance and adoption and scaling of V2G applications. So it starts with transparency, like you have mentioned or pointed out. Transparency is like really important, that the customer really knows what is happening with this vehicle and when the vehicle is charging and when it is discharging, and always being as transparent as possible. And right now, the problem that we face is that there are a multitude of apps or charging apps that basically tells you what is happening. So within a home use case, you have a home energy management system that is controlling everything. And then there's a specific app that holistically tells you what is happening with the car, with your heat pump, with your PV, and so on. And then there's the automotive OEM app that tells you what is the state of charge of the car. And this is basically, so there's different kinds of information available in different apps. So the transparency itself is a bit of a hassle, I'd say, where you have to like switch between a different apps to get exactly one kind of or one set of information that you need to know about what is happening with your car. So that is one key thing. So an user interface that clearly tells you, or a unified user interface that clearly tells you what's happening with your car is really important. And secondly, it's about charging the EV based on the mobility needs of the user. So with mobility needs, what I mean is the departure time and also the minimum required range or state of charge of the car. So based on these two factors, then you take into account all other factors like what's your PV production, what's your forecast looking like for the next couple of hours, what's your load consumption going to be looking like, and so on. So taking all of these factors into consideration, then charging your car to make sure that the EV is always ready for the user at the point in time when he wants to depart with the minimum state of charge is really important, so that the customer basically does not have a range anxiety or does not have to be worried about the car not being ready when the car has to, or when he has to leave for work or for any other purpose. And then finally, V2G or participation in V2G, or like V2G in the sense I'd say like VPP or aggregation, or trying to support the local grid, or also participation in primary or secondary control reserves and energy markets is definitely beneficial for all participants or all stakeholders within this environment. For the grid operator, for the end customer who receives an incentive because he's participating in such kinds of programs, or it could also be monetary and also non-monetary like CO2 bills, CO2 savings and so on. But what I see is that, again, while there is so much benefits for all the different stakeholders involved, the choice is definitely lying at the end of the EV owner or the EV driver, and he has the choice to opt in or opt out of this participation. So the complete flexibility has to be in the hands of the EV driver, so that he can always opt in and opt out. So that's basically the three key points that I see. So transparency, charging based on the mobility needs of the user, and always having the option to opt in and opt out of these V2G programs.
I see. That kind of goes in line with everything that we heard before. Thank you. Very interesting. Juha, you wanted to add something. I would ask you to make this quick as we are going towards the end of the time, and I will still have a couple of questions. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes, definitely. Just a quick remark to the Anders speak that first of all, you are more than welcome to try out the Virta's V2G enabled app. So hopefully it will meet all your wishes. And second of all, I do recognize this problem of not having any knowledge about the origin of the energy when you are charging. So when you're using the app to navigate, there's no mention. When you arrive at the charging station, there might be a sticker on it saying that this is wind power, this is hydropower, this is whatnot. But when you're actually looking for a charging station, you are unaware. And at Virta, there is one option we have recognized, that we enable the customers also make a decision to buy a kind of certified renewable energy, in which Virta would then take the burden of certifying the origin of the energy. It's not the perfect solution, but at least it's a solution to guarantee that the same amount of energy is being produced using renewable sources.
Oh, great, thank you. Also a call to action, very nice. I will try it. Thanks. One last question before we move to the Q&A, and we also have a couple of poll questions for the audience. But one last thing that I would like to ask Amit is like the whole vehicle point of view is very interesting to me. So could you give us any insights how V2G is going into the design into the design process of vehicles at BMW? Can you give us any insights on that? And
sure, Felix. I think as was evident from the discussion, V2G does make sense, but under specific conditions of regulation, technology, interoperability, business models, and so on. Right. So to that end, we actually have a research project going on right now in Bavaria, which has a participation from distribution operator, transmission operator, generation, a couple of universities, where we're trying out bidirectional charging and what effect does it have on the battery and the design of the vehicle itself. The results of some of the results are public. Some of them are going to be made public by end of the year, and then we would know more. How do we integrate these into the vehicle? Our position so far, or our finding so far, is if V2G or V2X is done under the right conditions, as in you can abuse any system, but if you can find a way to generate it to do it with the right parameters, you can live with the battery degradation. And of course, you have to keep in mind here that when we look at automotive design, it's kind of, we are serving the soup, but changing the ingredients of the soup on the battery. So we started with NMC 111, now 523, 811, 9.5.5, LFP. The roadmap is always evolving. And for us, it means we have to be a little more patient in terms of aggregating all this information, putting it all together so that we're able to provide a safe and reliable integration of these batteries into the vehicle, given all potential uses, including V2G. So it's in the design process. It's of strategic interest, and yeah, I cannot disclose anything more at this point, other than point you to the project.
Of course, but thanks. That's very insightful already. I think it's very interesting to hear that point of view as well. Great. There's so many questions that I could ask at this point, and we could probably go on for hours on end. But let's give the audience also a chance to ask any questions. And while the audience thinks of questions, you can either type them into the Q&A function, as I said before, or raise your hand and we can allow you to talk. But in the meantime, while you think of questions, and please keep in mind that we only have like 10 minutes left, so don't make them too extensive. I would like to take this chance and ask another poll question to everyone, and one of which was recommended to us by Anders. He pointed out that it would be interesting to see what the audience thinks on this. So the question would be, I will launch it now. In 5 years, will V2G mainly apply to large fleet owners, home charging aggregators of private charging stations, or all of the above? If you could give us your thoughts on that.
These choices are obviously not totally exhaustive or mutually exclusive, just to give us an idea.
So we got 8 answers so far. That's like 30% of the participants. There's a question, would this apply specifically to V2G or V2X in general?
I think we can stick to V2G since that's what we're mainly focused on.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, I'll give everyone else some time to answer the poll. We got 11 answers so far out of 26, so let's wait a little bit. In the meantime, I will read a question from the Q&A, and you can think about what you wanted to say to this. The question is, how do we envisage V2G commercialized for both CPO and end users? Applies if this has been covered. Apologies if this has been covered, sorry. So if anyone wants to take this question, please go ahead. Anyone?
I think repeat the question again. So what I'm saying is, can you repeat the question?
I can repeat the question, yeah, of course. So the question is, how do we envisage the V2G commercialized for both CPO and end users? Yeah, how do we envisage the commercialization of V2G? So I think the question probably ties back on how do we create an incentive, basically. Is that what the question means? So and the financial incentive maybe.
Yeah, I think for the personally, I believe the question is mainly around the future energy market that will be for the V2G. And my personal opinion is that it will be a transactive energy framework where we will now we have on a distribution side the prosumers as well to do a peer-to-peer energy transaction. So there will be a blockchain technology there where we have a market clearance price that can help us to do to use the local generation for the local load. And in terms of CPO and in terms of the users, for the CPO mainly work on the charging infrastructure for the journey enablement, on highways, on those kind of stuff. So for that, I don't think it will create that market but for the distribution level on the houses where we now have prosumers, they will build a market, and the framework, I think it will be a transactive energy framework there. Yep.
And as you raised your hand for that as well.
Yeah, I think that there will be a number of different models. One of them, which is already present, is the aggregators of fleet vehicles. I think that this is a logical first starting point because fleet vehicles are going to have more uniform charging characteristics and predictable charging characteristics, and then are going to be able to see the commercial case for entering into an aggregation agreement. I also think that utility companies, so electric power companies, will be offering their EV users more electric rate plans that will give them value in exchange for participating in V2G. Perhaps it'll be some sort of very flat value of $10 per month if you participate at the level of, let's say, 5% of your battery every day. And then I think that also automakers will have a chance to participate. So I know that Tesla is already acting as an aggregator for its battery power walls. But how long until vehicle makers also see that they can become aggregators for those home energy users who are already using their own branded chargers and who are also using their own branded vehicles? I think that all three of those business models could be viable, but I would say the fleet aggregators would be the logical starting point. That's where we see the V2G pilots already in existence.
Great, thanks. Also, Akash and Juha, you wanted to say something? Please keep it short as we don't want to go too much into overtime.
Yeah, trying to keep it short. I think the incentives or the financial incentives that end users would get out of this is really dependent on a lot of factors, and it changes from market to market. So defining what the incentive model would be is really important to have this uptake or the user support or the EV driver support for V2G.
Thanks. Juha?
Yeah, likewise, that I think in a kind of home setting, the prime initiative for the driver to get into bidirectional charging will be the home optimization. And then on top of that, you can have the V2G. But whereas in the kind of fleet setting or kind of more public setting, let's say offices, it has to be a really clear, really simple compensation scheme coming from the CPO.
Great, thank you. So I will move back to the poll questions now and share the results of that question that we just did. So I think we got 17 answers. And so most of people thought that V2G will mainly apply in 5 years to large fleet owners and all of the above. So both of these options got 6 out of 17 votes, and home charging and aggregators for private charging stations only got 2 and 3 votes. Yeah, very interesting. Good question. Thank you, Anders, for suggesting that. Is there anyone that wants to share any interpretation of that, or should we move on to the next poll question then? Okay, as I don't see any. Yeah.
Maybe I'm a bit surprised by the large fleet answer. As in, if you look at large fleets, right, you have a significant opportunity cost of non-use. So if let's say a taxi is not running for 3 hours in a peak time, it's got a significant cost of not being able to participate in its primary purpose. So maybe I would be curious to understand if it's large fleets, which are more like school buses or overnight charging of large fleets, or is it also in their peak usage time? But that's something we could follow up on later.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. I would like to ask one last question, and it's basically the same question that I asked in the beginning. And I wanted to see if the point of view and your idea of vehicle to grid has changed over the course of this panel discussion, to see what impact this made. And please give your answers now, and we will see how it may have changed over the course of the last 1.5 hours. We got 5, 6 answers, 7. That's great. Let's wait a short second. Okay, we have more than 50% of people give an answer, so I will end this poll now and share the results. And I think it's quite interesting to see. So no one still doesn't understand what it's about, so that's great. The 2 people that voted for wanted to learn about it and didn't know what it was, they have obviously learned something or have left the meeting in between. I don't know that, but still a lot of some people think it's reality. More people think it's a reality now, and I think that's also what I would say. I would have probably voted for hope. As a host, I couldn't be voting, but in the beginning I thought it's a hope, and for some regions around the world it still probably is. Talking about Australia and other places as well, with all the insights that Yosama provided, and Juha and Anders and Akash. But I do think it's more of a reality than I thought before. So I think it's a very good takeaway from this. Great. I think we are at the end of. Oh, there's some questions in the Q&A, but we are at the end of this time. So I'm sorry that we couldn't go deeper into the questions that were answered in the Q&A. If you guys are okay with it, we can take like another 2 to 3 minutes to answer these, but I would totally understand if you have a packed schedule and wanted to move on. So could I get a quick indication if you could stay in for like 5 to 10 more minutes from the panelists, maybe very quickly.
Yep, works for me.
Works fine.
Seems to be working. So let's go into the Q&A questions that were typed into the Q&A box. We have already answered the first one. So the next question what regions, continents are furthest from realizing V2G reality? What do you think?
For vehicle to grid, as I said before, we need EVs to do vehicle to grid, and still we are less than 1%. But for regions, I think Norway is on the top of having a more number of EVs. That this seems to be as a reality at the moment, because they have more than 70% vehicles are electric there. So apart from that, so I don't have any understanding of like other regions, but for Australia, it's a long way to go. But as we have more grants within 5 years or 10 years, I think we will have more EVs on the road.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to add to that? I think that
Yeah, I mean,
sums it up pretty well.
Just add to that, I think Asia is another market where the grid itself, or the grid infrastructure, is not that really stable, and that would also add to this V2G. topic, and so is, for example, some regions of Europe, where, for example, Italy, the grid infrastructure is not really that efficient, or I'd say like not really reliable, and therefore these would also add to the, V2G would add to more complexity. So these are regions that I see that might be further away from V2G reality.
Great, thanks. I think that one more question, and that'll be the last one. I think, do we feel that as a technology will become cheaper for vehicle original equipment manufacturers, remove AC charging from vehicles in favor of DC charging? This is probably a question directed towards Amit a little bit. What do you have to say anything to that?
Well, I'm not that deep an expert to comment on the AC or DC charging, but so I'll have to maybe take that up offline or more specifically understand the roadmap. But I think overall what we find is the technology is getting cheaper, definitely, but also on the battery side, the raw material prices are rising. So it's not, we no longer, we kind of hit a bit of a pause on how quickly the batteries get affordable. And in that sense, the room or the room to make profits is a bit delayed due to the recent, if you look at the raw material prices and so on. And that puts in, that continues to put in significant pressure on making the electric vehicles as affordable as possible so that they are ready for mass adoption without significant subsidies. So I would hold on a bit in terms of, technology is always leading to a price crash. There's also some other constraints that sometimes operate in the opposite direction.
All right, thank you for this answer. And I think that really concludes our event, our panel discussion, and thank you all for taking part and giving your great expertise on this. Before we end the call, I would like to ask everyone to scan this QR code or click the link that we will post in the chat to give us a quick feedback on how this event was done, so we can improve the experience in the future and learn things from what we did right and wrong this time. So if you could take this time to do that, that would be very helpful. And in the meantime, while you scan this QR code, I would again like to thank you all, the panelists and the audience, but of course, especially the panelists, to taking this time and given your perspective on things. And I think it's been a very interesting conversation, and I most definitely have learned a lot. And I do hope that we can continue this conversation off and online in the future. Yeah, so thank you all, and I hope you have a good day and a good night wherever you are. And yeah, keep in touch.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, have a good one. Bye.
Very interesting conversations.
Thanks. Great.